Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge Lift podcast. Today we've got a fantastic episode in store for you. One that Rob and I have been looking forward to for a little while. We've got a special guest, Mr. Joe Brightman, who is a very accomplished bodybuilder, an IFBB pro, and we get into the details and nitty gritty of steroid use and his experience experimenting with functional fitness coming from his bodybuilding background, which will support nicely our recent episode on bodybuilding and CrossFit and whether they should mix or not. Me and Rob learnt loads in this episode, and I think we got to ask a lot of questions that we've been curious about for a long time and got great honest answers from Joe. So stay tuned all the way to the end. There's some interesting nuggets that pop out from our conversation. But before we get into it, as always, a big thank you to our show sponsors, thetrainingstimulus.com. Please check out the website if you're interested in learning more about movement mechanics and standing out in the fitness industry, getting your clients better results through that. Also, thank you to wit-fitness.com. Use our discount code LL15 to get 15% off your purchase. And Hydro for all your blood flow restriction apparel. Use our discount code LL20 to get 20% off there. All right, let's get into it. Joe, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing, mate?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Very well, thanks. And thank you again for your time coming on. We're excited for our chat today. Just for the listeners who might not know who you are, please could you give us a quick intro as to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So Joe Brighty, Instagram handle, probably most people know, or if anyone does, will be Brightman. I am an IFBB pro classic bodybuilder, turned pro men's physique 2019, so a few years ago, and then did a couple of pro seasons over the last couple of years. Full-time, that doesn't pay. Full-time career is like online coaching. So mostly people with obviously body composition or body recomposition goals, or coaching into the stage, whether that be naturally enhanced, or people. I think that most of my demographic is people that kind of want to compete at some point. They're maybe not quite there yet, but maybe they're spending the next couple of years building up and getting into that point. And then obviously, taking people through preps, post prep, back into off season if that's what they want to do. And other than that, just like being a somewhat of a one-man business, which is always interesting, but trying to have my fingers in different pies and have other passion projects and whatnot. So, yeah.
Brilliant. And for the listeners who might not be so familiar with bodybuilding, could you just explain a bit more about IFBB? Because I think people might not appreciate
Yeah, sure.
how high level that is.
Yeah, so I guess as I learned over the last 6 months, a bit about in sort of the CrossFit space, there's a lot of different federations, if you like, or routes of competition. The IFBB is kind of the only route to the Olympia, which, if people don't know what that is kind of the World Cup of bodybuilding. I'm sure people have heard of Ronnie Coleman and Arnold, and all those big names, Jay Cutler, etc. That is the kind of federation they would compete in. So it's kind of it's the FIFA of bodybuilding, if you like. So IFBB, you can compete in IFBB Pro. In order to turn IFBB Pro, you have to win a pro qualifier show. That's probably, I'd say, like one of the hardest steps in bodybuilding, because so many people want that coveted pro card. Opportunities in the UK have been quite slim up until like a few years ago, when there was actually like an IFBB arm within the UK. So those shows are now super competitive. Like I said, to turn pro, you have to be the best on the day, or at least one of three, and there can be hundreds of people competing. So that's the IFBB. Aside from the IFBB, there's loads of other federations. There's some natural tested ones. IFBB is untested, and that's kind of the background of it.
With the category that you're in with classic, could you just kind of break that down just a little bit? Because obviously, from my understanding of bodybuilding, especially when I started to look into it a lot more back in the day, you were looking at like the Phil Heaths of the time, like that were massive, and obviously when you go further back with Ronnie Coleman, stuff even bigger. And I remember seeing a YouTube or an Instagram clip of Arnold basically moaning about where the bodybuilding physiques were going, and hence and then classic physique was kind of like brought around. But could you dive a little bit more into that and kind of tell the listeners a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I guess the hierarchy within men's bodybuilding is, I don't want to say hierarchy, but it is hierarchy, like a muscularity hierarchy, if you like. So men's physique would be at the bottom. That's where I turned pro. That's quite a nice place for people to start. You don't need to be as heavily muscled. So they're the guys that wear board shorts, obviously the banter is that they don't train legs. Most of them do, and most of them have quite incredible sets of legs as well. A step up from that would be classic. So that is where you wear. Well, actually, nowadays it's not far off like the budgie smugglers that bodybuilders wear. To be fair, but they have to be black. They can be like a bit lower cut, so you kind of maybe showing off the upper quad, but maybe it's not like a thong, if you like. But your whole legs are on display. You can see your glutes. Like it's practically bodybuilding. But there is a weight cap within classic, which I guess is the reason is kind of their way of stopping people getting too big. But believe me, when you see these guys in real life, like the average Joe would be like, "Oh, that's too big." I imagine most people would be disgusted by classic bodybuilders. So let alone open class. So yeah, classic is just kind of within the constraints of a weight cap. So based on your height, there will be a weight cap, and that obviously weight cap will rise as you get taller. But that is there to kind of contain that feeling of getting too big and still kind of. I guess channeling that old school aesthetic that a lot of people are still fans of nowadays, because quite rightly, like you said, like people like Ronnie Coleman, well, not even Ronnie Coleman really. It's weird that Arnold would be moaning, because he obviously he would have been not that far before Ronnie and whatnot, but that was kind of the freak era. I would say, and that's open class, so they're the guys that wear practically nothing. They're just literally got a thong on. Absolutely everything is judged. There is no weight cap. So I think like the current Mr. Olympia or the last year's Mr. Olympia would have been like 300 pounds on stage, maybe slightly less, which is just a ridiculous amount of weight. Like these guys are just pure monsters. And I guess as time's gone on and drug knowledge has gone on and training knowledge has gone on, obviously people have been able to get bigger and bigger, and whether that's in some people's eyes not always better. I think the IFBB are kind of aware of that as well. So Rami, who's the guy that won last year, he didn't win this year. He came like 4th or 5th. And actually first and second were two guys that had come up from a lower weight class. So 212 is kind of the weight capped open. It's not an open class, but open in terms of what they wear. So they can only be 212 pounds on stage. So quite often those guys are a lot shorter, but it can be like quite a much more like aesthetic look. So like Flex Lewis, for example, if you know that guy. He would have been. He was like the 212 goat for many years, and actually 1 and 2 this year were previous 212 bodybuilders, so a lot shorter, but just a lot nicer looking, a lot cleaner. So yeah,
what I see from like the classic physique, and it's like the bodybuilder's men's physique, like he is in like you the bigger, still got the tightish waist, and like Bumstead, is he classic? He is, isn't he? And how, so just in comparison, I know obviously for the listeners can't really get this, but how much bigger is he than you? Because you're, so for me, when I see you, obviously you are massive. And like, when people are saying like, when you see about like the size comparisons, but then I think I was talking to someone the other day, to someone at the gym, and they was like, but I think Bumstead's even bigger. And I couldn't put that into comparison in my head. So I just wanted to see what you said.
Yeah, well, in terms of body weight, probably not that much heavier. Like I'd say in terms of like where I've had to push my body in terms of like the heaviest I've been. So the heaviest I've been would have been my last off season, which is like 128 kilos. There's probably not that many like kilo differences between myself and C-Bum, but his insertions, his muscle maturity, all that stuff.
Yeah,
I would imagine if I stood next to him, I'd probably look like a little boy. Definitely on stage. So yeah, quite a lot of difference. But I imagine walking along in clothes, maybe not too different. But it's hard to say. I've never seen him in person.
Yeah, nice. And what kind of got you into bodybuilding in the first place?
So I was always quite a sporty kid. I enjoyed a lot of team sports, but I was just never that good at any of them. Like I remember the day I found out I was never going to be a good footballer. I was absolutely heartbroken. But I played football.
How did you find out?
I was just like, I'm just not going to be any good, am I? I think I was continually training for a local team and continually not getting signed on for the season. And I was like, why are they not signing me up? But I was obviously just in denial. I'm just not that good. And then I carried on that sporting endeavours throughout uni. So I played rugby at uni, again at okay level, nothing special. But alongside that, I started training. And then in my last year at uni, I did a competition, just kind of off on a whim. Like me and my friend were training together, and he was like, there's this show in Birmingham. I went to uni in Coventry. There's this show in Birmingham. Do you want to do it? And I was like, yeah, why not? So we jumped into this prep for however many weeks, did everything that you possibly could do wrongly. But I came second, and I was like, oh fuck, I'm good at something. So I just sort of carried on from there, really. I think a lot of people want to know like what the trigger was for going to the gym, and I literally think probably like most guys, I just felt pretty small and skinny and just wanted to be a bit bigger, and then just snowballed from there.
And to go the next step and take yourself to become an IFBB pro, once you come second in that show, was that kind of, you thought, do you know what, this is what I want to do, or was there kind of like paths away from it a little bit and then you kind of got back into it? Or
from that first show to turning pro was like, oh god, how many years would that have been? Like 4 or 5 years. So it's quite a lot of time difference there. Obviously that first show was like fully natural. I had no idea what I was doing. I then gave it a couple of years, but I was like, I might be good at this. I at least want to compete another time. And that was when my second show was when I was 23. So I did like 3 shows that year. I did one in Wales and one that as like junior men's physique, again, still naturally. And that time I was up against people who were assisted as well. So at that point I was like, oh, I actually might be quite good at this. So it was probably at that point where I was like, I think I'm going to try and turn pro. But I knew that was, a long time away, and also that I'd have to move to the dark side, as it were, and start taking anabolics. So yeah, it was at that point that I was like, oh, I'd like to, it would be cool for me if I could turn pro. There was probably still a bit of a pipe dream at the time.
Cool. I think that's something that I and a lot of the listeners will be really interested to learn more about, is how did you make that decision to turn to the dark side, as you say?
For me, it was. I speak about this a lot, and I'm quite passionate about it, and I've kind of gone through a lot of kind of thoughts about it when I consider other people. But for me, it was quite simple. Like I'd proven to myself that I was good at this naturally. That for me, I'd proven to myself that I could dedicate myself to the lifestyle, the training, the nutrition, whatever it was that I thought was optimal at the time, 4 years on end. Like I'd been doing it for longer than I'd done anything else. I'd stuck to something and committed to something. So that was kind of part one. And I guess as a byproduct of that, like I said, the whole lifestyle, is then part of it, because like drinking and stuff. Like I drink. I don't mind having a drink, but like I look back over those years, and I probably rarely had a drink because I would want to be able to train the next day and stuff like that. So I kind of slipped into this lifestyle, and I was inadvertently dedicating myself to that journey already. And so once I competed a few times naturally and done fairly well, and had an idea of what it would take to become pro, it was very much a case of like, okay, you either take anabolics or you're not turning pro. And I think there was always something in me that just wanted more for myself, whatever that was. I had no idea at the time. But I was, still working sort of 9 to 5 and whatnot. And every day I would just finish work, go to the gym, finish work, go to the gym. I didn't go out for drinks after work, or barely really socialize outside of working hours, because I was just dedicated to it. So for me, it was quite a simple decision. It was like, I believed that I could change my whole life, or the course of my whole life, by taking anabolics, or by turning pro, which would require me to take anabolics. So it was a fairly easy decision for me. I think for many other people, it probably is an easy decision, but they probably shouldn't be making that decision, I think. But that's the journey I've sort of gone through myself. I don't think it's really my place to tell people what they should and shouldn't do. But yeah.
But you might not feel that you should tell people, but do you have any advice for how long people should wait? Because with obviously the popularization of things like TRT and people now, the fact that anabolics is so spoken about openly, people are getting onto these sort of things younger and younger. And you left it quite a while, competed a few times, they say, naturally, and was doing well. So as you said, you earned the right to take them. So is there anything you'd say to someone that might be listening to this that might be a bit younger, but still wants to do the same journey as you? How long should they wait, or would you recommend?
Yeah, that's such a context dependent question. I don't think there's like a certain age you should wait. Actually, no, I take it back. But there is a certain age you should wait. I think within reason. It's such an unsexy message to put out, I think. But the bottom line, I've always said this, like with regards to competitive bodybuilding, if you want to be a good competitive bodybuilder, by and large, a bad physique, this is so un-PC nowadays, a bad physique, or a non-aesthetic physique, or a physique that's not going to do well in competition naturally, will also probably not do well assisted, right? You're just kind of, I would say this about steroids, they will just accentuate whatever you have at the moment. So you can't like change your shape. You can just add more bricks to that shape, right? So that would be the first thing. Like, I think if I always suggest to people, if you're going to take anabolics or you think that's a journey you want to go down, like let's compete naturally at least once first. Because competing itself, like it all looks great because you see that, you know, that end day where you're all tanned up and probably in the shape of your life and you get some cool pictures. But ultimately, the 6 months leading up to that, and that doesn't even talk about the off season, will completely take over your life. And for some people, it's like hellish. I reckon a lot of people will do one prep and then hate it and never do it again. So it'd be really foolish to do that prep assisted, potentially cause yourself all this damage, and then decide it's not for you. So I think the best piece of advice is compete naturally first. If you have the similar mindset of me, then compete naturally first and like do well at it, whether that means your first show, your second show, whatever. And then in terms of age, I think you use that term like earn your right to take anabolics, and I think that's such a smart phrase to use. I think you should be, before you even consider it, like you should be almost training and living the lifestyle as if you were on steroids without being on them, if that makes sense. You know, you should be dedicating everything to it. You should be training consistently every day, or every training day, you know, every week. There shouldn't be many sessions that you miss. You should be hitting macros or whatever your dietary requirements require you to do to get that physique goal every single day. You probably shouldn't be drinking that much, you know, very unoccasionally, I'd say. So in terms of age, like definitely not before like 21. But even for me, I'd say that's quite young. But then again, some people, I only started training probably when I was like 18, or I started training when I was 18. I probably started training properly when I was like 20, 21. You know, some people nowadays will be training properly from the age of 15. So who is it for me to say that by 21 they're not ready to take steroids? I think it's just a case of what you said, kind of, you know, earning the right, making sure you've done all the research, making sure you go to the right place and get information from the right people as well, because quite rightly, like you said, like there is loads more information out there now. Unfortunately, some of it is still terrible. It's the same with training. It's the same with nutrition information, and you know, and hypertrophy training, exercise information. It's still, the waters are still very muddy, and there's a lot more risk attached to obviously the muddy waters of steroids. So, you know, try and make sure that you're looking at the right sources. PubMed, you know, make sure that anything that someone is maybe recommending that you take has been studied in humans and things like that. But if you look hard enough, you'll find good information. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah, it did. So I think that's a really great point, and because it is considered the dark side and a lot of people conceal their use, I think it's great that people like you are being more transparent and making more good information more widely available so people can get the full story of the pros and cons. How would you advise somebody to do that research? Because basically the old school thing of just chatting to the biggest guy at the gym and asking him what he's on, you know, that's not the age we live in nowadays. There's the internet and everyone uses that as their first port of call. Like, how did you, once you made the decision that you're going to go assisted, how did you go about establishing what you should take, dosages, frequency, all that sort of stuff? Because I think it's such a, like, there's so many different types of steroids. How did you know how to get started?
Yeah, for sure. So I think when I started, I think the information probably still, it was okay, but probably still nowhere near as kind of as good or advanced as it is now. So I would have literally been on, you know Jordan Peters, trained by JP, heard of him?
Yep.
So he obviously has had this long-standing member site for quite a while now, and he kind of, I'd say he was one of the guys that kind of spearheaded that discussion around, you know, open steroid use and how to do it properly and how to do it safely and whatnot. As I say, I think since then information has moved on quite a lot. Remember, I guess that was 5-6 years ago now. But that was where I started, which isn't really that great still. You know, it's like that's still just a forum where people are still just providing information. But I think the good news is that there's a lot of people that had researched the right places. So there is literature around steroids and steroid usage. But again, even recently, so this week, I was doing a bit of listening on More Plates, More Dates, you know, Derek, that YouTube guy. And he was discussing, there's a book by William Llewellyn, who was one of like the goats of, you know, steroid information out there. He literally has a book called Anabolics. So maybe 5-10 years, maybe 5-6 years ago, that would have been the place to start. I think again nowadays things have moved on a little bit, and a lot of it is still kind of theoretical, because there isn't a lot of, I mean, who is going to sanction the study of steroids for hypertrophy? Like, it's not really a thing. It's kind of seeing the side effects from various different studies, and a lot of them are only studied in animals like rats and things like that, which have similar DNA to us. So I guess it's kind of a bit of a guessing game. But I would say there are some kind of clear leaders in the industry now, and these, to some people, these names won't mean anything, but they can go and search them. So John Jewett, so he's my coach at the moment. He's got a website called J3 University, which is literally like a module-based website which has a section on anabolics. He would be someone that I would trust to be doing safer stuff. Physique Collective is another kind of collective of people. They're here in the UK, which is spearheaded by Joe Jeffries. So he's easily one of the most kind of well-read people that I've come across in the industry on steroids. They've got a member site, so that's like $6.99. There's a load of like videos that kind of break down everything in there. And they'd probably be the two places I would go actually at the moment. But there are other names out there, and it is really kind of, I think I feel quite lucky on my journey that I think I've just fallen into the right kind of, or following the right people. Whereas many people will just end up following the wrong people and getting the wrong information, and then it's the same as just going into the gym and finding that information from Dave down the gym. But those two would be a really good place to start.
And when you started, so obviously you've built a very good physique, especially to turn pro. Did you have any side effects that maybe were from that, or did you have anything that has kind of come from that you now wish you didn't do, or that you learnt from?
Yeah, definitely. So I reckon I've actually been dealt a pretty bad hand when it comes to side effects. So initially it was fine actually. So like my first 2 cycles, which again, I think now, based on like nowadays, the safer use model that is out there nowadays, I wouldn't have done. I don't think they were by any means like dangerous, but I went in at a lot higher dosing than a lot of people will start at nowadays. And again, there's some nuance in that. Like maybe that was a good thing. Maybe that enabled me to grow quicker kind of earlier on. But a lot of people will effectively start really low and just slowly work their way up. And if I'd have done that myself, I might have avoided some of the side effects that I've had. So last year? Was it last year?
21?
No. 2021, October or November. So I had to have gyno surgery. That's like one of the most feared things in bodybuilding. You know, you get the puffy nipples. Yeah. Mine wasn't like horrendous by any means, but like ultimately to compete at a good level, it's one of the things that you almost might as well nip in the bud. Yeah. So this is kind of the thing. No pun intended. Yeah. This is where it's interesting with steroids as well, because that biological individuality across different people, like someone could have taken the exact same dose as me, would have taken probably loads more and never had that issue. And then you've got other people, maybe me in the middle, where I probably pushed the capability of my body in terms of handling estrogen, and ultimately breast tissue formed. And then there'll be another person who's got really bad gyno, you know, from doing less or doing more or whatever. I think the information nowadays, what I mentioned earlier, around kind of starting small and slowly titrating up, is a much easier way to not have those side effects, because you almost test your tolerance. Whereas if you go in at a dose that I went in at, it's a bit, it's not too late, but that tissue is going to have started forming, and then ultimately every time you push that tolerance, a little bit more forms and a little bit more forms, and then ultimately, like, it is a case of just getting it out so that you don't have to worry about it again in the future. Hair loss is another big one. So when I won my pro card, I basically had like a long head of like thick hair. And I get asked all the time, when's the hair coming back? And I'm like, it's not. Like, it's just the thickness is no longer there. And I have no doubt that would have been accelerated by anabolics. I've been lucky not to really suffer from any acne. I think that would be the other one that I would just be horrified to suffer from. And again, it's something that people would be kind of genetically predisposed to. Obviously, they can influence it with lifestyle factors, and there's things that they can look to do to tackle that or to prevent it to a certain level. But ultimately, it's luck of the draw. And And then obviously they're really just the cosmetic ones, which I think are the ones that are more instant and that impact you quicker and on a daily basis. Obviously, all the underlying things, or the things that people either will or won't look at in terms of blood work. So you've got the cardiovascular risks, the lipid profile damage, the damage to your kidneys, damage to your liver, insulin resistance. The list goes on. So there's a lot of things for people to worry about, really, if they are looking to take that route.
So obviously we've spoken about the negatives, like some of the drawbacks. So what have you found? Got to turn a positive on it. So what have you? How do you feel when you're on them? How now that because you've come off them for a period of time, like now you've got a nice comparison to obviously where you was before. Then you went on. Now you're off. Are you planning to come back on? Let's kind of go into that direction a little bit.
Yeah. So obviously the massive positive is that I think when I started this journey, I would have been, I guess, at the end of my like natural, I competed naturally at 83 kilos the last time I competed, and I last competed like in general at about 103 kilos. So that's like 20. That's more than 20 kilos of lean muscle, because I was leaner, this like kilos and kilos leaner. So I can say we can probably suggest anywhere between like 22 to 24, 25 kilos of lean body mass. So actually not muscle, because we need to think about that as well, because obviously there would have been hypertrophy of organs and shit like that. No doubt there's been like some bone density increases and all things like that. But the bottom line is somewhere in the region of 20 kilos of muscle over the course of 4 years, which is like, that's a lot of muscle, right?
Yeah.
So there you go. That's one thing. I guess if you are looking to improve your muscle mass, then that's one way of going about it. I would say, like, comparably for me to have done that naturally, probably either not going to happen or would have taken me years and years and years and years and years. So I guess that's a positive. In terms of how it makes you feel, so this is an interesting one, because it's only really recently that I think I've actually understood the true benefit of them. Now, I don't think this is all down to being on or off. Like, I had other lifestyle factors going on, the change in the seasons, the change in the clocks and whatnot. But so when I came off was in August, September. By like November, when the clocks are changing, it's getting dark. I definitely felt like a huge drop in just like that general like get up and go. And I'm like an early person. Like I don't really struggle to get up early. I like getting up early. Early bird gets the worm, and I like being up before everyone else is up and getting some work done or getting something done. I genuinely struggled to get out of bed before like 8:30, 9, if not later. Which for me, I was hating that, and I felt like I just couldn't do anything about it. And I'm sure that is somewhat down to the anabolics, or down to just having low testosterone. The big one that I've noticed the most is definitely like recovery. So I don't think I quite understood how much your recovery is impacted by steroids, which is really naive, really, because that is kind of the main way that you're able to build more muscle quickly. Your body recovers and rebuilds that tissue quicker than it would if you were natural. So you've got higher protein accretion and things like that. So you're able to recover from your training quicker, which means you build muscle quicker. And I just remember like my first like leg session back or whatever, natural, back in like a bodybuilding gym, I was like just absolutely crippled, and I was like, wow, I haven't felt this for a long time. So that would be the main one, like the recovery. Obviously strength, all these things are linked, the recovery, strength, and muscle mass. I'd say from like my peak like off season strength, bearing in mind I'm 13 kilos lighter than that now anyway, I probably lost somewhere between 15 to 20% of strength that I had. So that's another thing. And then I guess, yeah, just that like get up, that sort of get up and go. The kind of drive and motivation, like bearing in mind that everything revolves around, like my whole life revolves around my career, and it's all on me. Like I can't really not do it. So that definitely kept me going. But I 100% would have felt like a downturn in motivation or general enthusiasm.
So what made you go natural for like come off everything, and how did you do it? Did you just go cold turkey, or did you have to taper off?
So I want kids. at some point in life, and this has always been definitely suboptimal. So the information nowadays would suggest that if you're taking steroids to compete, which I think you should be if you're taking steroids anyway, blasting and cruising is the way forward, right? So you go to super physiological doses, aka higher than the natural level of hormones, and then in your recovery phases or health phases, you'll come down, continue injecting steroids, but just basically mimicking natural testosterone production. So you'll sit somewhere between 8 to 29 nanomolars, which is the natural level. So anyone natural, if they went and tested their bloods tomorrow, should land somewhere within 8 to 29. Obviously, the higher the better. So that's kind of what a cruise is defined by. So you just administer a much smaller dose and stay within that range. But by doing that, all your health markers might improve, and you can spend time working on your cholesterol profile. Make sure your lipids are all good, ensure that your kidneys healthy, your livers are healthy, and all that stuff. And that's kind of what people do it for. But you're still administering exogenous hormones, so you are still keeping your HPTA axis in shutdown, which is basically the system within your body that creates hormones, right? So you're keeping that in shutdown. So for me, that isn't something that I kind of want to continually do. I had also kind of come to the decision that I either wasn't going to compete again or wasn't going to compete again anytime soon. So for me, it was more important for me to kind of re-establish that HPTA function than it was for me to stay on and maintain muscle mass. So they were kind of the reasons for me coming off. In terms of like PCT, post-cycle therapy, again, something that's like massively misconstrued. We can talk about how to do it properly, but I think a lot of some of the information nowadays is probably just to leave it and see if you need a PCT. So PCT is post-cycle therapy. It's basically a protocol you can go through to get your body reproducing hormones naturally again. I came off, and it's not a case of tapering down, almost like by doing that, you're just kind of delaying the inevitable. Like the goal really is to get to baseline as quick as possible, so that your body starts going, oh shit, we need some testosterone. Right, let's start working again. So I did that. I think the first set of bloods I did, which would have been 6-7 weeks after I came off, was already suggesting to me that things were coming back. And then the next set, things were a little better, and then I had another set done like 10 days ago, and again things were a little better again. So for me, the hassle of running a PCT, which will include all these other drugs, all these other hormones that you're going to start putting in your body again, I was happy just to, given that it was coming back on its own, I was happy just to leave it. If you were unsure it was going to come back on your own, or if you were particularly concerned about getting back to a level quicker, then you may run a PCT. But I'd say for a lot of people, steroid for the people that should probably taking steroids for that reason, like it's a long-term decision. It's not something you jump on for 12 weeks and come off. You're kind of wasting your time. It should be a long-term, it's years we're talking. And obviously the risks to that are potentially, shut down forever in terms of your own hormones. And as I said, that was always a concern for me. So whilst I was working my shit out, working out what I'm going to do with the next few years, like for me, it made sense to come off.
Yeah, just on this as well, I think it'd be really interesting to find out when you are deciding if to go on or not. I think people don't realize how much commitment there is to the actual injecting, the taking this, knowing the times, like how much, like you mentioned at the start, like the lifestyle factors of actually making sure everything's going to be taken at an optimal time. Like it has to be mapped out right to be done right, because I know from this is back in the day, I remember seeing on websites like Predator Nutrition and stuff like that, use all the pro hormones that people that want to go get some assistance, but they don't want to inject themselves, so they start taking orals, which then does a whole different of bad things to you. From what I've heard, but how much commitment is there to the actual process of actually taking steroids?
Yeah, a lot. So obviously you need to get the steroids yourself. You need to fund that. That's not necessarily that expensive, but you still need to do it. You really do need to be willing to inject yourself 3-4 times a week. And no, orals are not a substitute for that if you don't fancy injecting yourself. So make sure you're ready for that. Regular blood work really needs to be taken. So probably every 3 months. definitely at the end of your blast phase, and definitely at the start before you start anything, and then again in your health phase to make sure that your health markers are back in a good spot. I think what a lot of people don't like, the list is so unsexy, but people need to hear this, and it will be the stuff that people miss off, and ultimately they won't feel the repercussions of that immediately, but longer term down the line, it definitely will. So I would say I would spend more money on, health supplementation than the steroids themselves. Absolutely, hands down. We can even talk about that. So a vial of testosterone, which is where you would start, right? On the black market for an underground lab, will literally cost you like 30 quid. Lay on top of that needles to last you that cycle. Let's say you just do one cycle. You're literally looking at like somewhere between 40 and 50 quid to do that with no consciousness for your health. So that's 50 quid. Your blood work straight away to start with is going to cost you about 120. So you can go to Medichecks and get that done. And if you don't have anyone to take your bloods because it needs to do it venously, you have to then pay for that on top. So that's either another 20 quid or another 50 quid if you need to book someone to come to your house. So we're already 170 versus 50. The next step you then got is you really need to be looking after your, let's say, cholesterol initially. So just taking testosterone is not hepatotoxic. It's not going to really do anything to your liver. You should be fine. But what it might do is increase your blood pressure, and it may well impact your cholesterol profile. So HDL suppression and LDL increases. So this is bad news. This will eventually lead to cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, etc., if you do it for long enough and are stupid enough. So you kind of need things to combat that. So there's a whole list of then supplements that we can take. So Supplement Needs, who are my sponsors, they do a kind of all-in-one supplement. It's a CV stack, right? It has all these really good ingredients in it that are going to help your body deal with that. That alone is 40 quid per month. So across the course of your 3-month cycle, you really do need that if you're going to do it responsibly. Already 120 quid. And that's just one supplement. We've then got like a blood pressure supplement. That's another 40 quid a month. I mean, I could go on for days. But you can see already that we're at 50 quid versus, 500.
Yeah.
And that is just a very, very basic cycle, and doing it sensibly, and still not being immune to the risks. That doesn't mean that you take those supplements and you test your blood work that you're going to be fine. Ultimately, we use this term, the safer use model, and the reason it needs to be called safer use model is because it's not safe. It's just not. Steroid abuse, no matter how little or whatever, can have some immediate effects, and it can have some long-term effects, and some of them can be really bad. So it's important for people to understand that, I think, and that's where that risk reward really comes in.
Definitely. I think for you taking that decision to take time off, you mentioned you want to have kids as being a big driver for that, but what other risks and concerns did you have in mind? Because something that I meant to ask earlier, which I'm sure a lot of listeners are curious, you hear horror stories. I think the thing that freaks most people out is the idea of stuff happening to the genitals, and you hear testicle shrinking. I remember at school, everyone would say you get a hairy bell end, all these sorts of rumors. And I think, I'd be curious to hear what stories you've heard, and what the potential downsides, other than infertility, that are on your mind.
Can confirm you don't get a hairy bell end.
We're going to need some proof, I'm afraid, Joe.
Back out your balls will shrink. That's called hypogonadism. That is absolutely normal. Obviously, again, I referenced earlier, you put exogenous hormones in your body then says, oh, okay, this job is being done for us, we no longer need to do it. So your testicles will atrophy. Probably, let's myth bust here. Your actual shaft doesn't atrophy, but your balls will. So take from that what you will. That is reversible if you can kind of recover when you come off. And actually, completely, it's not harmful at all. Testicular atrophy is not a problem unless you particularly want big balls or you're protected over the size of your balls. But you can, that is something you can completely pointlessly and cosmetically kind of counteract by taking HCG. But it's really pointless. Like, you're not getting any benefit from doing that other than your balls stay big, which just seems fucking weird to me. Or whatever. So yeah, they would fertility and if you're really concerned about your balls shrinking, then that's a problem. But aside from that, yeah, it's more the cosmetic ones I kind of mentioned earlier, and even more importantly, like I do try to keep bringing back to, like, it's not really the cosmetic ones that are going to kill you. Like, you're not going to die from going bald, like, but you might die from your arteries clogging up eventually. So that's the thing I think people need to be aware of. But obviously, it's not immediate. It's not in their face. And even if it is immediate in their face on like a set of blood work, you still don't feel it, you know. But ultimately, that is kind of the silent killer over time. So yeah, and then obviously there are real horror stories of like death, and quite often they are in, you know, the super large bodybuilders, the open class bodybuilders, and it's kind of hard to explain those. I mean, it's probably not. You can probably go and read their postmortems. Most of them are like public or made public in America sooner or later. But you know, a lot of these guys, I think we have to remember, are long time steroid abusers, you know, taking doses that most people should never or would never touch, you'd hope. They're also utilizing other things that ultimately can be dangerous. So obviously insulin is a bit of like a taboo, a bit of a scary one for a lot of people. My education recently has actually been that actually insulin for a lot of people is probably a pretty smart idea. In terms of if you're pushing food super high, you're going to reduce pancreatic stress, reduce insulin sensitivity. But ultimately, if you fuck that up, like, you can die. You know, it's not uncommon to hear of people trying to kill themselves by taking an insulin overdose. Like, that's a thing. So, you know, there's things to consider there. I think a lot of people, you know, I'm talking about blood work, but there's other things that need to monitor, so like your heart health. So ECGs should be done like at least once a year, if not twice. That's an echocardiogram, which is effectively to measure your heart function, measure the size of it, the size of the walls, if you're seeing any hypertrophy in the walls of your heart. And there's one other I was going to mention, which has now slipped my mind. But yeah, there's lots of risks and lots of horror stories for sure, and I think people should be scared of it ultimately. I hope that kind of strikes fear into people to at least go away and do the research if it's something they're considering doing. But yeah,
I think go on. I think the horror story side of things, I think, is key because of that readiness of how available all the information is now. People, it's not they disrespect it, but they don't think about the long-term effects. They're thinking, right, okay, maybe a year to two, cool, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get big, and then worry about the things later on, and not actually put all these things in place. Like, for me, I've not done it. I've done one legit like blood draw for my blood test, but I use Thriver just for the finger prick one. I know it's not exactly the most reliable. However, I've done it for the past couple of years, like a couple of times a year, just to kind of see what's going on, so that if anything, I watch trends. So rather than so seeing those trends has then made me understand, okay, cool, what lifestyle factors am I doing that affect certain things? Now, obviously, if I was to then go and become assisted, I've got some type of records. I can kind of see what my body already, the state of it is. And then when I start implementing, say, protocols on, that I can see actually how it's affecting me. And I think that is massive, that you have an understanding of where you are now, so that you can understand where you're going. And I think that's kind of come through a lot from what you've been saying here. You've mentioned about obviously blood work quite a few times, and I think that is key.
One other thing as well, it did just come to me that I think is so important to mention, and it's something that the research is simply not there at the moment. It's not something I think people consider, and I think it's really concerning. So obviously the buzzword of the last few years has been like mental health, and I think there is so much for people to consider when it comes to steroids and mental health. Like, not only mental health, but actually like the health of your brain physically. So a lot of people who are, you know, well educated in the industry and have done the research or read through the papers will be very open and say, like, there's just not enough research on the long-term effects of this stuff. I don't think there is a way that we can test brain health. Like, I don't know if anyone's going and getting brain scans done. Like, I don't think that's a thing. Like, at least not in bodybuilding, I've not heard of it. But in this is kind of what's scary and what should scare people, is that maybe in 20, 30 years, like, we are just going to see people dropping dead, or a lot of names who were really prominent are having early deaths because of the impact of steroids on their, like, physically on their, or biologically on their brain chemicals and their brain health. That's the one thing. And the other side is like the mental health. So absolutely, steroids will impact your mental health, and that will happen almost immediately. You know, people talk about roid rage. Like, we should probably speak about that, because that's something that a lot of, like, the Gen Pop will want to know about. As I said, with kind of the physical effects of steroids, I think the mental effects of them as well. Like, who you are as a person would just be exaggerated. So I'm not an aggressive person. Like, I don't often shout or get in arguments or, like, lose my temper or whatever. So I never really had to worry about that. Like, I've never lashed out on steroids or, you know, done anything like that. But someone who maybe is a bit more aggressive and maybe isn't in control of their aggression, their temperament, like, that should be something they should worry about. Whether they would worry about that because of the person they already, who knows, this, you know, remains to be seen. But that's something to consider. And then again, like, in terms of mental health, so, you know, you go from being natural, you're like, at this level, you're relatively happy with how you look and how you feel. You take steroids, you suddenly come up to this level. Oh, my hands are there. You come to this level, and then, you know, like, you come off. Like, then how are you going to feel about yourself? Yeah. That was a conversation I had a lot with, like, my parents. Like, so funnily enough, my parents are not together, but my dad and my stepdad both took steroids when they're younger. How weird is that? And so it's always been a really open conversation for me. Which is nice. Like, I feel very lucky to have that. It's never been something that, like, sort of frowning upon or whatever. It's always been very supportive because of the journey I've been on. I think they understand it's been for something a bit bigger. But when I was coming off, we were having that conversation. They're like, how are you going to feel, you know, when you come off? Because it's weird. Like, for many years, I've gone into the gym and been one of the strongest or the biggest in there. How is that then going to feel to go back in the gym and not be that guy? I think I've dealt all right with it, but, like, some people won't. And, like, self-esteem, mental health, confidence is all really important stuff. And ultimately, if you feel shit about yourself on a daily basis because of, I don't know, a 12-month cycle you did, maybe you never get out of that hole. Because maybe you always feel like, you know, you hit your peak and you never quite got back there again. So I think, like, day-to-day mental health, how you treat people, how you treat yourself, will all be impacted by steroids as well.
Yeah, I guess having someone to talk to is key. And like you said, you had your dads and there to kind of at least be able to discuss thoughts that might be going on, because as you said, like, the time of year you come off, where generally people are a little bit more down because there's not much sun, it's that time of year that you could have went into an even darker place if, I guess, you didn't have people to kind of just surround yourself with that, making you feel a little bit more positive. And that if you did just stay in your say apartment, in your own little hole, just like getting more and more down this dark rabbit hole. And yeah, so I think definitely the thing of having a support network is key.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, obviously, I'm so deep in this journey. Forget steroids. Like, I'm so deep in the journey of training that would have always. I was never going to just stop training, no matter how I felt. Like, there wasn't going to be a week where I just didn't train. But if you, like you say, if you did get into that downward spiral where you see your physique maybe deteriorating a little bit, you get a bit unhappy with it, you get even more demotivated. You know how it goes. Like, you know, General Pop find it hard enough to stick to. Imagine going from being at your peak physique, and then within a few months, you probably still look great to a lot of people, but to yourself, you're like, oh, I feel like shit, like, look like shit, don't want to train, don't even want to go back to the gym. I think that's where that sort of transitionary period for me came in quite handy, because I almost tried my hand at something totally different, and it was no longer about, oh, how much weaker am I getting, or even necessarily like, how am I looking. I had a whole new challenge to get stuck into, and one of my friends said, like, that was a really smart move for you. Like, I now wonder if it was, but I think it definitely served a purpose. Like, it gave me something else to focus on for a period of time.
Absolutely. We're going to get into the training stuff in just a second, but before we move on from the steroids and the mental health, and you mentioned Derek from More Plates, More Dates, and he relatively recently outed the Liver King for his steroid use. Yeah. And that brought up a conversation which I think has been bubbling in the background for a long time, which is around the transparency of use of steroids in the fitness industry and people who claim to be natural but aren't. And as I mentioned earlier, I think it's really refreshing that you're honest and transparent about your use, because that gives people a frame of reference. Like you've told us, you put over 20 kilos of lean mass on in 4 years, and we know that's not a reasonable expectation to do naturally. But the disingenuousness of a lot of fitness influencers or people who are prominent in the fitness industry who claim they're natural but are not can lead to a lot of people having negative self-image because they think they're doing everything that they can to get their ideal physique, but they still don't look like Liver King, for example. What's your take on the state of the fitness industry with regards to honesty? Like, are a lot of the influencers out there covering up steroid usage with your from your perspective and your knowledge?
That's such an interesting question, and I think about this quite often. Not that necessarily, but I think about the echo chamber that I'm in within fitness. So as I said, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the people that I've followed, I fell into this I think like a really safe space with regards to fitness, right? So one of my good friends within the industry, Tom TM Cycles, I think was one of the first people to start being open about their steroid use, and that kind of trickled down. And now like a lot of people are just, they put it on their Instagram posts what they're taking or their doses or whatever. So I see everyone who is honest, and I probably don't follow anyone who's like dishonest, but there's a lot of these like old heads in the industry now who've almost kind of moved on from putting out fitness content, and a lot of people that will still be like up for debate whether they're natural or not. I actually find it kind of hard to answer. The whole Liver King thing was really interesting for me because obviously I saw it all erupt, and I was like, oh, what's everyone mad about? Why is everyone mad about him? And then someone said it was because he claimed natural, and I was like, what?
Yeah,
I couldn't believe it. I was like, what? He's actually been claiming natural. Like, oh yeah, then he's totally in the wrong and he deserves everything he's getting.
But it's how he claimed he's in a natural as well, because he really belittled anyone that took any type of assistance. And I think that was the harshest part of it, because it was the subprimals that you are nothing. And he really dug himself a hole of saying that he was so far not in that world. You're like, mate, how much are you spending on it a month as well? That was what blew my mind as well.
Yeah. And so for me, like for a long time, I was like, what's the fucking big deal about? And then I found out that he claimed natural for so long, and I was like, oh, that's what the big deal's about. So I think it's easy. It's easier for people who consume fitness content, probably just assume that they're on steroids. Like, honestly, just assume that they are. If they've built a business or, got a physique that looks somewhat unattainable, maybe, the opposite of innocent until proven guilty, maybe go with that because it's probably safer. But again, I will also caveat that with, I don't want that to like put a lot of people off, because there really are some like incredible natural physiques out there that are natural. And if you want to see examples of those physiques and you want to see what is capable naturally, maybe, granted, if you have good genetics, but also with a good bit of dedication, like you can only do the best with what you've got. But that will be a lot if you do dedicate everything to it. So I would recommend those people like head to UK DFBA, for example, BMBF, and probably the Worlds, which I think is WNBA or WBNA. But these will be the peak natural physiques. Like UK DFBA is the best natural federation in the UK, I would say, alongside BMBF. They then send people off to world natural Olympias and stuff, and I know and have trained with and I'm friends with some incredible natural bodybuilders. Like, there is hands down, and it's almost more impressive, like especially for me now, coming out as a natural now, training naturally and seeing like my recovery capabilities, the capabilities of my strength, even having built all that muscle not naturally. Like, I can't even keep up with some of the natural guys. Like, there are some incredible guys out there and girls who do have and are building incredible natural physique. So I think you have to draw inspiration from people, draw inspiration from assisted bodybuilders by all means, but if that is not something that you want to do or want to dedicate your life to, like, still understand you can build a fantastic physique naturally. I think that's so important. But yeah, on the whole, most people probably assisted. I still can't believe that anyone even believed Liver King. Like, everything about him looks assisted.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah. Something that Derek from More Plates More Dates does, which I think is part of why he's so famous, is his natty or nots.
Yeah.
Are there any simple rules of thumb? Because people talk about was it the fat-free mass ratios, where basically for how tall you are, there's only a percentage probability that you can be this big or have this much muscle. How are there any things like that where if you just saw someone in the gym and he claims they're natty, you'd be like, no, you're not. Like, what are the telltale signs with your expert eye?
Oh God, I reckon I could tell most people natty or not. Honestly, I think I could walk in the gym and be like, definitely. I think, but before that, I want to say like I would say I've never looked into anything like that in terms of like the fat-free mass rules, and I think don't like look over that. Like it's a really important point. I've never been bothered, and I think that's what people should take forward with them. Like I actually don't care if someone's natural or not. It has no impact on me, you know. So I'm not going to be sat at home like researching how do I tell if this guy's natty or not, because ultimately it doesn't impact me. Like it's nothing to do with me. So first is like don't be obsessed with stuff like that. But I understand people are. I'm just saying I don't think it's productive. I think some things to look out for, like general rules of thumb, would be probably like
Hairy
a
Bellends.
year-round level of Hairy Bellends. Yeah, look out for Hairy Bellends. Just have a look over and see if you can see any sort of bulge in their pants, and if not,
Small balls but hairy bellends.
Small balls and hairy bellends. No, I would say things to look out for. I'm probably going to use some bodybuilding terms here that people probably won't quite wrap their head around, but we could easily show them some examples. So, first things first, like, is someone like what looks like unachievably lean all year round? Like, that's probably a good way to look at, a good thing to look at. Number two would be like, are they improving year on year? Like, do they look bigger year on year or not? If they're staying lean and improving year on year, like, probably not going to happen. Like, we all know you need to be in a surplus to build tissue. Staying super lean, you're not growing year on year. Like, look at any of the good natural bodybuilders. Like, they get out of shape. It has to happen. Strength would be probably a one to look at. Like, if you're really that arsed, like, what are they lifting in the gym? Does it look superhuman? If it is, then they're probably not natty. But there will be exceptions to that rule, as ever. And then this is the one that I think people maybe will struggle to understand. There's these terms that we use in bodybuilding, particularly when you're getting close to a show, when we're talking about like people looking dry or like grainy. Grainy is a real big one. If you look at Liver King, like he looks dry, you know, he looks grainy. There's nothing really wobbling. He doesn't look soft, right? He doesn't look like he's in an off season. He always looks lean. He's got vein vascularity is another one as well. I think that vascularity is quite a big telltale sign. Kind of constant, you know, always vascular. They would be my big ones, I think. And then you've got the obvious ones like skin condition, like how's their skin looking? Are they spotty? Is it looking like they've got acne? And there's also steroids will age you. Steroids will age you in the face. I mean, you've got to be really obsessed with someone to like keep looking at you after year. Is their face? They're getting older in the face. They must be on gear. But things like that to look out for. Like quite often, you know how we kind of look at the peak physique and like it doesn't look healthy. You know what I mean? Like a lot, it looks impressive, but it doesn't look healthy. And I think that is something that to look out for. Like higher blood pressure, maybe they're looking a bit red all the time in the face, and there's lots of things. But I think initially it's that like condition of their body. You know, are they lean and do they look kind of what looks like unattainably muscular? Then probably not natty. In a roundabout way.
Yeah, I think it's really important as well that if you do want to claim someone is not natural, you have to fully understand their training history. Because like if someone's been training since the age of say like 12 to 15, they're going to have so much more muscle than, like, for instance, I only really started training when I was around 23 properly. Like before that I was dabbling in the gym and stuff like that up until probably from about 16, but never anything really properly. But then in 23 I started to actually train. So, like, realistically, I've only had to say about 10 years of actual proper lifting. Whereas if I'd done properly from 16, what would be the size difference beyond any genetics thing? But actually, like, that would have been like nearly, say, 15 plus years of quality training. You just don't see that often because most people aren't committed for that long. Whereas, like, even like someone like that, obviously, that you and I both know, like with Foray, like seeing someone who's trained from such a young age and has had such a healthy lifestyle, is putting on a lot of lean tissue, and he's only 24. So it's like, for most people, like, I can't ever imagine that, but it's because they started so much later than him. He's had a head start there.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's so easy for people to say, okay, you've got a better physique than me, you're on gear. It's like, well, learn a little bit more about the person.
Yeah. And actually, there's actually let's actually talk about some examples where I strongly believe, or I'm certain, that people aren't on gear and everyone believes they are. So have you guys heard of Matt Does Fitness?
Yeah.
Gymshark athlete. He is berated for being on gear all the time. There is just no way that guy's on gear. Like, no, not a chance in hell. He trained with my friend Josh a little while ago. A lot of people need to understand, like, Instagram will play such a big part in this. So, and he actually did a really cool reel the other day. It's actually so helpful. He showed people like a 10-minute transformation in his little studio where he took a picture of himself before and then after, and then showed the one that he would post. And it is like, he looks like he's put 10 kilos of muscle on, but he's natty as they come. Like,
he's strong, and he's been at it for
well
a
into
long
his
time.
30s,
Yeah.
been at it for a long time. Probably again lives an extremely like healthy lifestyle, and also he probably got some decent genetics. Like, you see his brother as well, who's a much smaller time influencer, but they look the same. They've both got, like, body fat distribution is fascinating. Like, some people just maybe don't get fat abs, and we will always look at their stomach and be like, oh, that is how you tell how lean someone is. But actually, they've either just got really well developed ab column, or their fat just distributes elsewhere. So there's a lot of things like that to think about. I think a lot of people, so many people, look so much bigger on Instagram than they do in real life. I always get told the opposite, which I think is probably my downfall. But like Matt Morsey, if you saw him on Instagram and saw him in real life, I think you'd be pretty underwhelmed at the size of him. Like, I still think he's got an impressive physique, but the actual, density, width, thickness, like, he's just not that big. And that's something that people should really take into consideration. I think when you see people on Instagram, it's probably nowhere near what they look like in real life.
Amazing. Great. Thank you. I think a lot of people will get a lot of that. I think it's something that a lot of people are curious about, the anabolic side of things. But one thing we definitely wanted to cover today was your foray away. So when you cycled off, or you stopped taking steroids, you changed your training style slightly, and you thought that was a great thing to do at that point, because you didn't have a direct comparison from what you were doing to what you'd pre cycling off and then being off. Could you tell us what inspired that change, and then we'll go through what you learned in that experience?
Yeah, so again, I think this is a bit of a baptism of fire. Like, there'll be so much that goes into this, but I'll try and explain some of it at least. I think I quite often get to the end of prep, or I did at least the last two, and I get this like insatiable urge to like not be doing bodybuilding. Like, it doesn't feel that healthy, right? Even when you're, regardless of what end of the scale you're at, it doesn't feel healthy. Like, you're either like relentlessly chasing tissue or relentlessly chasing fat loss. Both those things are extreme. They're both pretty uncomfortable a lot of the time. Some people absolutely revel in it. I would say I'm one of the more normal bodybuilders like out there. So I just like to kind of live a normal life quite a lot of the time. Like, I like going out for meals. Like I said, I don't mind having a drink every now and again. It's not often, but it's like occasionally I would like to kind of do that. And then when it comes down to training, like, I'm at my peak in terms of like off season, I got pretty freakishly strong at some points, and that doesn't even feel nice. Like, it's cool in your head to think, oh, I lifted that and I did this and did that, but it feels like shit. Like, you feel shit doing it, you feel shit after, you feel shit the next day. So all that stress in the body is a lot, and ultimately my mind was probably pretty stressed out with what was going on as well. So I deemed it a good idea if I was going to come off. I was like, there's a few things, but the functional side of things just seemed a good option to me because I think it supports a more healthy lifestyle. So my goals when I came off anabolics and stopped competing was I wanted to maintain a physique that I was happy with in terms of body composition. So I thought that the functional world, something I could sort of get stuck into every day. It's going to be pretty calorically expensive, and a new challenge. And maybe that would support me having, a lean physique, enjoying how I looked, also enjoying my training, and also feeling healthier. So that was the other point, right? So as bodybuilders, the best way to lose body fat or put on muscle, like, we're never doing the sort of work that you guys are doing, or what functional fitness sessions are doing, because it's not your quickest way to build muscle, like 100%. There's no way. Bodybuilding is called bodybuilding because it's the best route to get more muscle mass or less body fat. Like that's the long and short of it. However, I don't think it's conducive to a more wholesome lifestyle, if you like. I guess I saw function as like a good way for me to get stuck into a new challenge and have something that literally supported my body composition goals at the same time. There's probably a load of other side missions that it did in terms of taking me away from the bodybuilding atmosphere. I wasn't stuck in bodybuilding gyms comparing myself all the time or comparing myself to my former self and all this stuff. So that was good as well. And yeah, I just generally wanted to feel and move better, right? Marchand always talks about moving well or moving better, and that was something that I was definitely keen to do. I definitely didn't move well, still don't now. So yeah, there was a lot of aspects to it. It just felt like a smart decision for me at the time.
And was it?
This is a tricky one. I don't know if I'll ever know the answer to this. I think it was a big lesson. I think I learned a lot. I think I made some really cool friends. There's a lot of. I took so much away from it, and I think that if my business wasn't so deeply rooted in who I am, what I do, the message I put out, the example I set, then I think it would have been a fantastic idea, and I probably would have continued with it. Let's say I'm still working 9 to 5, and no one cares about my training other than me. I'll probably carry on with it, to be honest, because I think it does support that lifestyle. I think the bottom line is, whether I like it or not, I've built a business around me and what I do. And at the moment, or at least a few months ago and still now, I don't think stepping away from it is the kind of healthy thing for me to do. And what I realised was, I had conversations with loads of people, throughout this time period, and they're like, oh, you need to do what makes you happy. But ultimately, having a successul business makes me happy, and having an unsuccessful one makes me very unhappy and very stressed. So there's always going to be sacrifices with that. And if that means that I, have to go back to bodybuilding training, and I say that in quotation marks, because actually since going back, I've kind of loved it. It's been great. It feels like I'm back home. I feel like I'm good at it. My content feels easier. I like educating people on it. I like coaching people on it, and I like leading by example. So yeah, was it a good idea at the time? Probably in my specific scenario, potentially not. But as with anything, I don't regret it. I think it was just another experience, just another chapter.
Yeah, spot on. I think I really like what you said there, that I think not enough people appreciate that if your goals are putting on muscle or losing fat, bodybuilding is the best, most direct route to do those things. And a lot of people get into functional fitness thinking that that's actually the best way, the most direct path to achieve an aesthetic goal. And it's just not. Bodybuilders have been doing this for decades, and they've tried everything. They've experimented with all different styles of training and nutrition, and they've got dialed in to a very precise recipe how you go about achieving aesthetic goals. That's not to say you can't achieve aesthetic goals through functional fitness training, but it is a more indirect path. And I think that's the honest reality that not many people face up to. So if you're purely aesthetically driven, bodybuilding is the way. But if you want a more balanced approach, you want to move better, you want to be healthier potentially, then that's when we start to look at the functional fitness side of things. And I don't think enough people make the conscious decision as to what their priorities are, as to how that should inform their training. So yeah, appreciate you saying that.
I think they also feel ashamed. Even myself, from how this year, after finishing my year with the powerlifting competition, I needed another direction that I wanted my training to go in, but I didn't necessarily want to train a whole year for that powerlifting competition again. And to say to my, I knew I'd put on some size, some mass. And that was the goal with the competition. So then I felt not ashamed, but I was now I basically just got to say, I just want to look good. So I'm just gonna. But the thing is, I'm still not optimally training for body composition. So I'm because at the end of the day, I enjoy strength training. I enjoy the style of just expressing my strengths. But at this moment, just reducing my calories and keeping everything else pretty much the same is just my opportunity to kind of start my journey. Then if I want to specialize coming into after about 3 months of this, I know I'm probably going to have to taper in a little bit more of the training style and maybe a little less stress on the body from such an overload, and actually take it to a little bit more just the bodybuilding side of things, which I thoroughly enjoy anyway. So it's just I understand my goal and how long I'm expecting it to take, which means I don't have to take such a direct path to get there, because I've given myself, say, like 6+ months, and I don't even care if I don't hit it in 6 months, as long as I'm on the way there. That's I've just given myself an arbitrary six, because last time I did it, when I did a bodybuilding show, to lose the amount of weight that I need to lose this time, took me about 6 months, but I did only have one night out in the middle. It was like literally after 3 months, it was a stag do, went out, but after that, it was the only time I strayed off of plan. So it's like, this time round, I will have a little bit more flexibility. But it was just funny, the initial thing of me saying, I want to lose weight and I want to look like this. I felt not embarrassed, but kind of embarrassed to say. I just have an aesthetic goal, and it's funny how that's become a thing.
Yeah, I think it's a real thing. I think CrossFit. There's a lot of brilliant things I love about CrossFit, and one of the things that's great through one lens is that it has a performance focus. So it's all about how fit and healthy you are, what you can do with your body, what functional movements, what skills you can unlock. And one of the big notable things about CrossFit gyms when they started opening up was that there are no mirrors. So it's not at all about how you look. And that led to a insinuation that vanity is bad and chasing aesthetic goals is bad. So there would be some shame associated with somebody who just wants to look better, and like, don't worry about how you look, like just be healthy, move well, and work on your kipping pull-ups. But that's not in line with real human nature. People do care about how they look, and that's always going to be the case. So there's a bit of dissonance there where people are denying reality that the general population probably cares more about how they look compared to how much of an athlete they are. And we can see that in the numbers. If you look at the numbers of people doing bodybuilding and how many people follow bodybuilders as compared to CrossFitters, it doesn't lie. Like, the general population is more interested in looking good than unlocking functional skills. And is that what we really want? Is that what's going to, lead to enlightenment? Maybe not, but that is the reality of the situation. And I think if people had more of an honest conversation with themselves to say, if I was on a sliding scale of a percentage, how much do I care about getting functionally fit versus looking good? The people who really care about getting really functionally fit probably already look good. So that's taken care of. But for somebody who's just getting into it, they probably want to look good first before they start caring about performance goals. And I think it's just an interesting topic that doesn't get enough time in the fitness industry to just say, let's be honest here. Are you aesthetically motivated, or are you performance motivated? Because there's a lot of people who are performance motivated, and I think that's great. I love it. But if somebody's pretending they're performance motivated when actually they want to shift some timber or put on some size, then they're going to be disjointed in the way that they go to the gym, because you're teaching them to snatch with an empty barbell for 25 minutes. And they're like, I've not stimulated any muscle here. I've not got out of breath. Like, actually, is this moving me towards my goal? I don't think so.
I think you've made so many good points there. I think it's I think if you think too difficult, if you think too intensely about how wrong it is that everyone has aesthetic goals, like you'll just be a nihilist. Like, it's exhausting to even think about. Like, you are swimming against the biggest tide if you're going to try and change everyone's opinion on body composition doesn't matter. Like, we've been conditioned for as long as I've been alive. There's magazines with men and women looking great. Like, you pick up Action Man, you pick up Barbie, like, fucking hell, from day one, like, you are conditioned to think like, heroes look like this. And that's not even changing now. Like, you go to the movies, like, I just went and see Avatar last week, incredible film. Like, they all got great physiques, you know what I mean? They look incredible. It's just not happening. And it does feel quite like defeatist to say that, I think. And I can imagine some people get really pissed off with me saying that. But like, it's not my job to change that, and I'm not going to try and spend my time doing that. That'll be a fruitless task. But it was interesting. Me and Rob had quite a few conversations, probably over the course of the transition, and maybe back towards the end. And I came into March at one point, and I was kind of laughing because I was thinking I was moved away from this like Vanity Fair of bodybuilding, but actually, you go on any like CrossFit influencers page or functional, they all look great. They've all got their tops off as well.
Yeah.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's you're not getting away from that, and
No.
it'll be the guys and girls that look the best that will sell the best and will get the sponsorships, and like it's pretty exhausting trying to fight against that, I'd say. But you made a really interesting point about the kind of where people are in their self-esteem journey or how they feel about how they look versus where they want to be with their performance. Like for sure, like you wouldn't believe, or you probably would believe, but the amount of questions I got from people that were like, "Oh, I'm really inspired by your move. I'm going to go to functional. Like, will I lose muscle? Can I still build muscle? Can I maintain my physique, etc., etc., etc." And I think, yeah, for me, I said it time and time again, like I wasn't really bothered. That wasn't my main concern. I wasn't worried about, am I going to lose muscle here? Like, because I was sort of assigned to that anyway. I've gone natural. Like, yeah, of course I'm going to lose some muscle. But for a lot of people, that'd be a massive concern. And if they're perhaps not happy with their level of muscle or level of body fat at the moment, I guess maybe A, do some self work, but B, like maybe stick to bodybuilding for a bit first. That'll probably be easier. And then the final thing that I just want to pick up on is what you said about people who are good at kind of functional fitness and they've stuck to it for building a physique within functional fitness. If you look at like, I mean, we take Ollie, for example, he's probably also pretty genetically blessed and has been an athlete his whole life. But if you dedicate 10 years to being good at functional fitness, I dare say if you're pretty good at it by the end of 10 years, you probably look quite good, because your whole lifestyle will be revolved around, I want to get good at functional fitness. Sure, it wasn't the quickest route to get in that physique, and if you did bodybuilding, maybe your physique would be better, you know, in quotation marks. But committing to anything physically demanding and challenging, and supporting that with nutrition and recovery for a decade or 5, 6, 7 years, like you're going to have a better physique than you did when you started, or you're going to be closer to that social construct of what a better physique is, to be politically correct.
Nice caveat.
Yeah. So obviously, since finishing up with the functional fitness stuff, you've have you got anything more to add on that, Ash? Or
I was going to ask, just because we just did that episode on why bodybuilding is not good for CrossFit, to go through your experience of the key distinctions between bodybuilding training versus functional fitness training, because they are significant. And we just did a big podcast about how they can be detrimental to CrossFit performance, which I don't think enough people appreciate, because they're in this blurry middle ground, not sure whether they're training for physique and aesthetics versus performance. They're doing, they're using methodologies which are kind of, for one thing when they're actually seeking the other. So given you've got such a great history in bodybuilding, what are the key distinctions that you noticed when you started doing more functional training?
So I guess with being like a good bodybuilder, again, like I think I take this for granted, but like training well is a skill in itself. You know, understanding tempo, understanding control, understanding not how to, the total opposite of functional or CrossFit, like how not to move a weight from A to B, like or at least how to move it from A to B with the maximum amount of internal focus and the maximum amount of concentration on what you're doing, as opposed to just getting it from A to B the easiest way possible. That was definitely like the biggest distinction for me. Was like I got really frustrated with myself trying to learn certain movements, because I was like, I'm just picking this up because like I can at this point. So that became really difficult for me. And you know, even it's almost I think it would have taken me so many years to like unravel what I'd learned and then start relearning. Definitely CrossFit, like the functional stuff. Some of that I think I probably got on okay with, but it was when I started learning like a high, was it high pull? Did that? Was that right? Have I used that? Is that right?
Yeah. Clean high pull.
And then obviously trying to even work that develop that into a snatch or whatever. I was never going to get there. I mean, I did it for one day, but I could. It was what you said earlier about like picking up a barbell, not stimulating any muscle, and probably not burning that many calories in 40 minutes. I could have done a whole session or half a session in that time. So definitely like tempo and control, just understanding internal focus, having such a good understanding, having built such a good understanding of how to contract a muscle under load, and then having to almost forget about that just to take the bar from A to B in the easiest way possible, I found like absolutely impossible. And I think really I was probably at the total extreme end of it in terms of like just practicalities, like just being able to get into certain positions. Like we were trying to get me into like a front rack. I can't even get into front rack. Like I really tried. Like I spent a good again, it pales into different. Like I spent a few weeks trying to improve that and felt like I was getting nowhere. And it wasn't that I was getting nowhere. It was like it actively hurt. Like things were literally hurting me. Like it was nothing. I wasn't feeling any. I was getting all the negative like recovery implications of a session, but none of the positive ones. You know, I was actually just like fucking my joints up. I remember like my wrist, like I'd wake up the next day, my wrist was being bits and all sorts. So I was definitely not a good, test tube baby for going from bodybuilding to CrossFit or functional. And it was funny because I had a conversation with one of my old clients who actually, I think I took him through like a natural bodybuilding prep. He did pretty well, got absolutely skinned out, forgot all about bodybuilding, went over to kind of CrossFit eventually. And now he does compete. I think he's doing like turf games or whatever. And he was like, oh no, like you're doing really well. Like you can do it. And I was like, mate, the key difference is you transitioned at 80 kilos. I am like 115 kilos trying to go from someone who, heavily muscled, very immobile, but pretty much built to be good at bodybuilding to someone who like needs to move freely and let their body just, flow like water. And it's like, it's not going to happen, or at least not going to happen anytime soon. So, I think key differences would be just that different understanding of how you control a weight across the two different sports or exercise forms, and then like mobility obviously absolutely huge for sure.
I think even just on the mobility side of stuff, like your front rack was impaired mainly because of the size of your biceps. So just that alone is, I think it's hard to comprehend that, your arms are too big for you to hold a front rack position. And it's like, most people say, okay, your lats, your shoulders, all this are tight and stuff. So as you're doing all your work and stuff, there physically isn't room for your hand to go there. And I think that's where you're so developed in the sport of bodybuilding, of how far you've got, that to then transition now, as you said, you was happy, like you was all right with losing muscle or whatever to kind of start that journey. But then, it's just the amount of time that would have taken and dedication, I guess, wasn't necessarily the appropriate time for you right now. And if there was maybe another way of doing it, then there might have been. Maybe just if you were still interested in incorporating, say, a more functional way of training, maybe not using a barbell at all for a lot of things, and like, using things like sandbags, using the bikes, and using more strongman-esque equipment, and having that as a hybrid where the mobility restrictions are quite similar with some of these strongmen, how just the sheer size of them. So like there's maybe plant a little seed for a bit of strongman for you. You never know.
One day. I think, that's a good point, Rob. I think having gone through that experience, Joe, what do you think each school of training could learn from each other? Like, what could functional fitness people learn from bodybuilders, and what could bodybuilders learn from functional fitness people?
Oh God, probably to not be anything like each other. That's actually a really good question. I think that is a tricky one. It's even to think about it. Like, March one's interesting, isn't it? Because there is this kind of a bit of a hypertrophy focus, like in terms of like what Patrick's putting out and that functional physiques program and whatnot. So I think there's stuff that maybe functional fitness people can learn from bodybuilding in terms of if they're actually looking to improve their physiques. But if they want to be a better functional fitness like trainer or whatever, like probably not a lot from bodybuilding, and vice versa. Like it really is like the total opposites. I think so much of the functional fitness or CrossFit lifting is so suboptimal for building muscle compared to what bodybuilders have now pulled together. Like it's that they are worlds apart. I think bodybuilders could learn from how like just fitter and healthier that space is. But honestly, aside from that, I wouldn't say there's a lot. To be fair, they're so different.
I think just the implementation you've done recently of doing more walks in the morning. I think as people sometimes maybe into a bit more CrossFit, functional fitness, that side of things, where, as you said, there's a little bit more focus on health, a little bit more focus on those attributes rather than just necessarily the performance in the gym and the nutrition. That, going for your daily walks, getting your sunlight, thinking about your sleep hygiene, all those bits, which for a CrossFitter probably is quite normal. And unless you're at a high level bodybuilder, you might not think about those things. And like, I remember, I think I saw one of your posts the other day in your story saying about like, that's one of the things that you love doing, your morning walks, because you like to get out, do your thing and walk to the gym. I heard you say and stuff. And it's like, you get like 40 minutes and you're at and you don't all those steps, just like you have done this morning. It's like there's so many benefits, and then it's cardio, which is then obviously when I was on my final few months of prep, the final few weeks of prep, my cardio went from being inside to outside, and because it was around the summer sort of time as well, and then it just got me feeling really good, because then I was more driven towards doing my cardio. So I was doing an hour's walk outside rather than say 40 minutes on the treadmill. Was it more effective to be on the treadmill? Potentially, but then I was outside just feeling better about the walk. And because again, measurable, if I'm always using the same treadmill doing say 400 calories, I can always do the same thing and progressively do more. Whereas when it's outside, maybe I've walked a bit slower, maybe I've walked a bit faster. So there's a few other variables there. But I think that's something where I would say, looking at kind of what you've done there, and I think as a bodybuilder to maybe take into consideration are those health aspects that you might actually get some extra gains, because you'll put yourself into a better, more parasympathetic state rather than always necessarily being high alert, bang, ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think bodybuilders or functional fitness are all just people alike, can learn from that for sure. And like I said, I think it's interesting what you mentioned, because again, as this bodybuilding industry continues to develop, it isn't all about optimal training and stuff. Like I don't know if you heard about grounding. Like the first time I heard about grounding was like 5 years ago from bodybuilders. Like, so the people that are really, really interested in doing absolutely everything to optimize themselves for progress, that is a thing within the space. Like like you said, getting the daylight and all stuff like that. But I think that comes from everything now, like podcasts and stuff that we're hearing more about it. It's just more accessible.
Or hearing about Dorian Yates, about like how, because obviously he's gone to the complete other side. I remember watching a London Reel all about him and like how his life has changed and what he does, and like he talks a lot about grounding, meditation, yoga, all that side. He's gone very holistic and like still looks really good. So
Yeah, I think that's it. I think once you get to the extremes, when you optimize fully for any one goal, whether you optimize fully for performance or you optimize fully for aesthetics, then health suffers. But when you come away from the extremes, there's a little bit more room for overlap. And I think that you almost got to plot yourself on that Venn diagram of how far towards health, performance and aesthetics do you want to be. And if you want to be at the top of your game in any one of them, the other two are probably going to have to take some compromises. But there's definitely a lot of synergy for bodybuilding and CrossFit away from the extremes, I would say.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
just to finish up, I think, because we appreciate your time, but obviously now you've left the functional fitness space and diving back into the world of bodybuilding. Could you maybe give us a little bit of an idea of what the plan is there? I just saw you got a new coach, so what's going to go on there?
Yeah, probably still being whacked out in my own head as well. I think again, a lot of it is going to come down to what I think I need to do for the health of or the success of my business, and that like the whole journey, as opposed to like just what I want to do with my physique. I immediately plan to like run a bit of a fat loss phase at the moment, like just like the rest of us. We've got some aesthetic goals with some trips away in summer, so I just kind of want to get to a place where I'm happy to maintain in terms of how I look, body composition and whatnot. And then the plan is sort of make a decision on, do I want to push it back to the extremes again? So that decision is still being made literally in my head right now, because I'm effectively with the new coach. He is very much an out and out bodybuilder. I think there's not much consideration for anything other than like body composition goals at the highest level. So getting to the Olympia or whatever. And so obviously to do that, I need more tissue. So he has said like, you're going to be healthy and you're going to perform better on anabolics, even on low dose, but just starting again. So my testosterone at the moment is at like 5 nanomolar. Obviously I'm not going to be, and I said earlier, 8 to 29 is the range. I'm currently below that. So obviously I'm not anywhere near what I could be. So that's a decision I'm making like at the moment. Like literally, am I just delaying the inevitable? Would I rather not step back into that? I think I need to make a decision of, if I'm going to compete, then let's stop hanging around. But right now I'm still sort of going through that in my head. So yeah, I may compete again. Like I think I probably will. I can imagine myself competing again, probably 2024. But the decision's not totally made just yet.
Nice,
exciting. Yeah. Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. I think that's been a fascinating chat. A lot of listeners will get a lot out of it. If people want to find out more about you, where should they look?
At Brightman _ on Instagram, or YouTube, I think it's just my name, Joe Brightman or Brightman Fitness on YouTube. They'll be the most common places that I'll post.
Perfect.
Thank you very much for your time, mate. Really enjoyed that. And as Ash said, I'm pretty sure a lot of our listeners will thoroughly enjoy that too. So cheers, mate.
Hopefully. Cheers.
Joe, thank you so much for coming on. That was awesome. I mean, diving into the anabolics and stuff, like I say, we got to ask so many cool questions, and something that I really recommend you do as well is definitely go follow him on social media, especially if you are interested by some of this stuff, because he often does Q&As and really dives into a lot of detail. So like all the stuff he kind of spoke about here, and there's a lot of specificity as well in a lot of the questions. So really, really cool. Yeah, I mean, it really did back up our episode that we just released as well, the one about bodybuilding and how it probably doesn't have a space in CrossFit. But then understanding that, you know, where if you do want it to be included within your functional fitness training, that understand that you're just not going to be as optimal as you can be. So really, really good. Again, thank you very much, Joe. We hope you enjoyed it as much as I did and Ash did. And as always, thank you very much for tuning in each week. If you do want to show support, you can head over to YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel, search Lunge and Lift, or you can head over to our Instagram page at lunge.lift and give us a follow there. You can leave us a 5-star review, because you wouldn't obviously give anything less. And on wherever you're listening to it, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts. But as always, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, guys.